Well, it's great to be here with you all today. I am a recovering academic, not current academic. My PhD and master's are both in public health, but I'm the CEO of a public health nonprofit. We have an office here in DC, New York, Atlanta, and San Diego. We're about 40 people. Half of them are public health practitioners, and then the remaining staff are media and marketing people. And what we do every day is large-scale behavior change programs for public health. We only work on public health programs. And then we do public health programs, campaigns, and we do a lot of media monitoring. We were founded in 2013, and we basically, anything under the umbrella of health communication, we're involved in. So we have people here from the NIH. We were the organization that told the NIH's story about Building 10 on the Discovery Channel. And then we also do these larger sort of big data programs around misinformation, which is why I'm here today. It's really nice to be here in a room full of people who study misinformation and work in this space. That's not often the case for me. Normally I'm presenting to your more classic public health audience. And so there's a lot of catch up that the audience has to do to understand what I'm saying. So I'm going to skip all that catch up today. We work on basically a huge portfolio of public health programs. It's sort of the gamut. As many things as a health department does, we're involved in. And I'm going to jump right to a program that we run called Project Vector. Project Vector, at the moment, PGP, Public Good Projects, is the only organization in the United States that monitors continuously, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year, vaccine misinformation. So there are a lot of organizations that do this. We provide it in real time to health organizations across the country. And our pilot program was established in the state of New York. So we monitor all data from publicly available media sources. So any social media data we can get our hands on, but also television, like broadcast news, print, so newspapers and magazines, pretty much every website, just anything we can purchase and analyze using big data techniques, which I won't go into during this talk, but which I will happily talk about at my 3:30 workshop. So Project Vector was set up specifically for vaccine misinformation, and I'm going to show you how it works. This is a real-time technology demonstration, so we'll see if it actually functions. Okay. This is something that you also see how many tabs I have open at any given moment. It's just like my apartment. I know where everything is, but if you move it a little bit, then I've lost it. So this is an example of what we pull weekly. So how this works is we have big data mechanisms behind the scenes here, and this is a public website that requires a password to access. To get a password, we have to know who you are and vet you. And that is because anti-vaxxers are not nice people. So I get the previous panel, empathy is where we need to start, but if you've been on the front lines of this, it's not a friendly debate. So it's very different than a one-on-one interaction in a doctor's office. If you're doing this on a larger scale, like a population scale, they find where you live, they find your friends and family, and they attack you. So we have to do precautions on any data sharing that we do because we always assume an unfriendly audience is going to get hold of the data, but we do our best to mitigate that as much as we can. We filter this data according to national level and then upstate New York and the rest of New York. Is there anyone here from New York City? Okay, a few of you. So upstate New York is not New York anymore. And so like I said, every week we update this, and what we're doing is we're not focusing on pro-vaccine information or neutral information related to vaccines. We're interested specifically in anti-vaccination information. And we found some interesting things through this process. One, it shifts as the news cycle shifts. So right now, anti-vaxxers are really interested in coronavirus. And then if you zoom in to specific hotspots in the United States, their interest changes depending upon a particular bill. So everything about the anti-vaccination argument becomes about what's happening in a particular moment in time. As a public health person, I can say this is one of the things public health is horrible at, is adapting quickly. I would also like to point out that what has changed over the last 15 years, if you think about it, have vaccines gotten less safe or less effective? No. The only thing that's changed, and the reason there is a manufactured debate about vaccines, is because of the proliferation and the ease of misinformation. So I think it's important, if you're on the public health side of this thing, to remember that the facts haven't changed, and this all happened under our watch. So all of the techniques that we were using 20 years ago, saying that we're going to double down and just do those techniques more often is probably not going to be the right answer, because this all happened while we were doing all of those techniques and while we're continuing to do them from 20 years ago. I think we need a really, really dramatic change in our tactics. And when I talk to people who follow this thing closely, or who go to city council meetings and have a bunch of people in red shirts show up and scream at them, they agree with me. And I think if you talk to people like that are on the vaccine expert advisory panel for CDC, they are saying very dire things on the scale of a climate scientist. We're behind the 8 ball, we don't know what we're doing, we need help, we need dramatic changes in strategies and tactics. So I often see this friction between the measured public health approach that we're trained in school to project, and then the reality of a growing anti-vaccination movement. It has not plateaued and things are getting worse. And I don't think we can solve this problem without acknowledging that things are getting worse every day. They're not getting better. All of the techniques that we just heard about in the last panel may or may not be effective, but they're not being scaled. If we found effective solutions, they are not occurring at all on a national level or even a local level. And that's really, really clear in the data here. There are a few recurring themes over and over and over again, and there are a few recurring people over and over and over again that are responsible for the overwhelming majority of misinformation that people succumb to and then become anti-vaccination. They're very identifiable, they're very loud, and they don't want to be hidden. It's what do we do with them once we find them? That's the real question that we're faced with. So feel free, if you're in the audience, to sign up for Project Vector. Right now, this is information that's happening right now in this week. There's a lot of conspiracy theories about coronavirus, as was mentioned. The thing in Maine right now is skewing everything. And news organizations aren't helping. I think news organizations are actually working really well most of the time on the side of science. But in Maine, for some reason, probably because it's Maine and Maine's weird, all the local news organizations are saying big pharma is pushing an agenda, and the agenda is just get vaccinated. So it's a weird, it's kind of hard to predict state by state how this thing goes. But I want to show you some of the things that we learned doing this project. Here are the top authors on Twitter that create over 60% of all misinformation about vaccines. So it's really easy in public health to feel like, I can't figure out what's going on here. It feels like every single day there's new information. I don't know what to do. I don't know who to look to. Look at them. They're real easy. They want you to know who they are. The question is, what do you do, like I said? We need effective techniques, and it's not cutting the head. It might be cutting the head off the snake, off of this hydra. But social media companies don't want to do that for probably really good reasons. But so what techniques do we use as a public health community, and how do we do a lot better job of getting the public, the silent majority, the middle of the American public, middle of that bell curve, activated? Most people are in favor of vaccines, but they're not doing anything. They're just sitting on the sidelines. We haven't given them something to do. And in public health forums, we still talk about it like it's our job. It isn't our job. Our job is just, if you're a public health organization or institution, your job is to stick to your facts and probably wear like that cool Navy-looking suit and stand and read your PowerPoint. There's a thing that the public needs to be given to do. It needs to be activated. And if you think of other movements, marriage equality, sexual harassment, racism, all of these societal movements all have an identifiable theme and identifiable identity, and people can join it and feel like they have equity in it. But right now, we're not giving the public any equity in the vaccine debate. If you look at themes used by the top authors, the top anti-vax authors on Twitter, here's what they talk about. And you can dig further and further into this. Like I said, it kind of fluctuates week by week, month by month, but this tends to be where they land on. So a lot of policy discussions. So again, this kind of flies in the face of a lot of what you hear from public health people who don't track this every day. They're actually like the individual incessant attention to every ingredient in a vaccine is not the largest thing anti-vaxxers use to argue with you. It might be in a doctor's office, but it's not on the population scale. So potential messaging strategies. Let's take, one thing I also never hear is us learning from other movements. So the people, public health, again, like I love us, but we're really siloed. We silo ourselves. When is the last time an epidemiologist talked to a health communications person in the same office? Where they speak different languages and they don't know how to talk to each other. So now, take that on a much larger scale. The vaccine people never talk to the tobacco control people, and the tobacco control people never talk to the people who work on sexual and reproductive health. Totally different conferences. So now it's even harder to look outside of this and look at other movements. But here's an example from counterterrorism. The State Department right here in DC attempted to counter terrorist propaganda across social media a few years ago. This is relatively recent. And they started with a group called the Center for Strategic Counterterrorism Communications. It was a horrible, dismal disaster, well documented by good investigative journalism. And the reason it was a horrible failure was the State Department used its own accounts to start arguing with terrorists online. Let that sink in for a second. It was amazing. And the examples are still there present. It would be like someone who's recruiting for ISIS would get a GIF of an American flag, and the State Department would say, "You're wrong, America's the best country on earth." Or, I have some screen grabs here, we would insult their English proficiency. So this all fell apart, and then what they did was they switched to the Global Engagement Center, which is what's running right now. And the Global Engagement Center has a totally different tactic. Interestingly enough, it was co-created by a marketing person from New York, rather than like military people at the State Department. So Global Engagement Center, which I received no money from, by the way, instead said, actually, probably the majority of people in the world don't like terrorists. So why don't we just give data and support to the vast majority of people and organizations in every country who deplore terrorism and extremism. And since they've been doing that, the amount of terrorist messaging on social media has gone down dramatically. And none of it has the State Department's logo on it. It's because they started treating people like partners and stakeholders in their own lives and got away from this viewpoint of we control what happens when terrorism pops up. I think we should do that for vaccines. And I don't see that happening very often. There's not a lot of health departments out there who are bringing in all of the people locally who are pro-science, who can be identified as a potential ally, and arming them with information, then sending them out. This is from our data, but almost no religions prohibit vaccines. The involvement of the faith community is almost nil. So we need to do a better job of engaging with the faith community. Professional associations and thought leaders, chiropractors are a huge problem, and nobody's talking about it for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe it's because we allow them to wear white lab coats for some reason, and other countries, by the way, don't. But chiropractors, a core part of a chiropractor's training is that Your solutions for your medical problems should come from your body, not from the outside. So there are two professional associations that represent chiropractic in the United States, and one of them is openly against vaccines on its website, and we don't do anything about it. And we also let those chiropractors walk around in hospitals, giving people medical advice. So if you look for people who are doctors online who are arguing against vaccines, they are often not a medical doctor or a public health researcher like myself, they are a chiropractor. Then you have social media influencers. We don't use them at all. So we often publish our research in peer-reviewed journals, and one of the most common critiques I get back from editors is, I'll be explaining how we mobilized communities for a public health purpose, and we use social media influencers as part of this, and then I'll get questions back from reviewers saying, explain to me what social media influencers are. And why do those matter? I need a lot more evidence on why you should include this in your paper or why this is a good methodology. And what I would like to say back to them, and what I'll say here is, brands this year in 2020 are expected to spend $15 billion on influencer marketing. That is the only citation that I need. We can learn a lot from other sectors. Brands are not stupid. People who work in marketing are not stupid. They're using their own research to inform their own decision-making and where their dollars go. And they have a lot more dollars and more resources than public health has. So I think we have things to learn from other groups. And we talk about cross-sector collaboration a lot in public health, but that, like I said earlier, that tends to stop it. I talked to an epidemiologist. And then mass appeal, that was my earlier point. Just make it so that people can get involved. We have no human rights campaign. We have no 350.org. We have no One campaign. Where the hell is the campaign that's pro-science? It doesn't exist. So when you're thinking about what to do, government can do certain things, and then the rest of society can do other things. And I'm going to show you an example on the next slide. I'm not personally convinced, but I would love to see data, and I know people are going to study it. Is it worth the CDC's time to go refute things on an individual level? I used to work at CDC. I worked in the Center for Tobacco Control. I worked on CDC's one large campaign, the Tips from Former Smokers campaign. It is really hard work, and it is thankless work, and no one likes you. So I often have that quote, that survey reported back to me, that 80% of the American public trust the CDC. I'm really dubious about that, to be totally honest. It's often trust in comparison to other federal agencies. Great. I don't know if that's a distinction that I would want. It's versus USDA and CDC. I guess I have a vague understanding of what USDA does, so CDC, because they're in movies. In their cool suits. It's a really tough one, and what we see in the data every day is that there's a lot of erosion of public trust in institutions, and this is not new information. There's a reason the administration looks the way that it does. There's a reason the world looks the way that it looks right now. So relying too much on if you put a government logo on it, people are going to trust it, I think would be a huge mistake. Because again, that's what we have been doing for 20 years, and this happened while we were doing that. So look at this. This is from today. This is on the CDC's account talking about the flu vaccine. All of the comments are negative. All of the comments are anti-vaxxers, except for maybe one innocent person that just goes, 2 doses? And then everybody else is like, you're lying, you're taking your money from pharma. It's just, it's this constant stream of vitriol directed toward the CDC. And I know that the reason, I understand all the biases here, but my point is, if you are a member of the public and our response to the vaccine debate is defer to the CDC, then what someone gets when they go there is a thread of the CDC's wrong. That's a really, really big problem. So it can feel like this right now. If you're in the middle of this whole thing, and this is in our own work, it feels like this a lot. But I think, to go back to my point, I wanted to share you one example from our work, and then I'll stop. This is a flu promotion campaign funded by Kaiser Permanente. So it's across 8 states in the District of Columbia. And it's focused on traditionally vaccine-hesitant communities Communities that are vaccine hesitant for really damn good reasons, Latinx and African American communities. So it's not focused on Santa Monica or Portland. And that's probably why we were successful. What we got here was if you just we had 120 people who counted as influential in their cities that they lived in. And so we selected a social media influencer based upon the zip code that they lived in and who their followers were. I have no concern with who this person is as an individual. I'm concerned about who they reach. And what we found were every single time one of these people said, here is why I'm personally getting the flu vaccine this year, they had an average of 500 comments on every single post that they made, and 93% of those comments were positive. So if you juxtapose that with the CDC's, there is something to learn from that there. We also evaluated this, sort of a case control, and we had statistically significant shifts in knowledge and attitudes and behaviors related to vaccination in these communities, as opposed to communities that didn't receive the intervention. So this, again, though, it's not large enough scaled. It's across 8 states, but we need to get it much bigger. And I would love to stop being questioned about the use of engaging real human beings in the work of public health. So that's it. I think I'm at time. Thank you very much.